Hi everyone. Welcome to the January lecture series. My name is Isabel. I am one of the tutors here and I will be taking you through modern history. I've never done a modern history lecture before. Usually I'm confined just to chemistry, but all for trying new things. So hopefully you learned something today, and if not, then I'm really sorry. But I'll try my best to explain um, power and authority to you. If you need any more help, because because you didn't like the way I explained things, or you're just a bit confused, there's a bunch of other resources that you can use as well. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We are here to talk about something much more interesting, and that is, oh, not that, that is modern history. So, as I said, my name is Isabel, and some fun facts about me. I graduated in 2022. So I've just completed my first year at uni. I go to UCID. I did exercise physiology for my first year, but I'm transferring into MedSci. So that's what I'll be doing in 2024. I did 3-unit maths, English advanced, chemistry, bio, and modern for my HSC. And I got a band 6 in all of them, which is how I got my 99.3 ATAR, which is really cool. But modern history, while it wasn't my favorite subject in school, it was my best exam in the HSC. And that comes down to the way I prepared, which I'll talk about later. But some non-school fun facts about me, that I like to dance and play touch and go to the beach and do water related stuff like stand-up paddleboarding. So that top image there, that's me paddleboarding in Hamilton Island. And the bottom image, you can't really see the sign because like my camera is covering it, but there is a little hashtag UCID sign at the front of the quad. And the quad is just that really pretty building that tourists come to when they visit UCID, because they think it looks like Hogwarts. It's really cool. If you want to go to UCID, you don't want to have a class in there because it's ancient and kind of gross in there, but it's really pretty from the outside, which is why I took a photo of it. And another side fun fact is when you're watching this, so I'm recording this in December sometime, but when you will be watching this, I will not be here in Australia. I will be off in the Philippines somewhere. So when you ask questions in the live chat today, just know that it is not me. It is somebody else doing, sorry, the ear thing just for that. It is someone else doing it. So yeah. I'm sure they'll be able to answer your questions, but yeah, won't be me. I'll be doing fun stuff elsewhere in the world. Okay, so the game plan for today is we're gonna cover the main chunk of the first topic, the core topic, which is power and authority. And it's all about the Nazi regime to 1939, so just before World War II starts. We'll also talk about some practice questions, discussing exam technique, and some of my tips on how to live the HSC modern history life. And then any questions that you have, feel free to ask them in the live chat. As I said, I will not be the one answering them, but someone else who is equally as qualified will be answering them. So no question is a silly question when it comes to the HSC, although I will say we are talking about the Nazi regime, which is something that was horrible. They did some bad stuff, and because of that, just make sure that you're not being insensitive in the live chat. Like, not that I think that anyone who would watch this to try get a head start or a recap on the HSC would ever be insensitive in a live chat like that, but just wanted to disclaim that we are talking about the Nazi regime. We are talking about some horrific laws and some pretty dodgy ideologies. So just make sure that your communication in the live chat is respectful. I shouldn't have to say that, but just in case anyone needs a reminder, just remember this is modern history. Real things happened. We need to be respecting that. Okay, so we're gonna get straight into it. I'm gonna save all of my like exam technique and study kind of wisdom until the end because the core study, power and authority, is a massive chunk, and um, we just there's lots to go through. But what I really like about the way that the syllabus is structured for this core study is the fact that you get in the syllabus you get really good like dot points for notes. The syllabus itself is well organized for writing your notes, so it's really easy to flow through it. An overview of what the core study is about. Power and authority. The reason why it's really important that you understand this topic is because it's the only topic where every single student who is studying modern history has to answer the exact same questions. It's the core topic. And it's a lot of content that you need to memorize and understand and discuss, and lots of ways it can be tested. You can ask to explain something, evaluate something, discuss different ideas, explain cause and effect, source analysis, perspective, reliability. All of that can come into play in this first section, which makes it quite difficult because it makes a lot of question combinations possible. And there's also lots of different levels of marks that you could be getting. So, in order to be competitive in this section and to be good at this section, I guess, is you want to be able to provide succinct answers that are also quite nuanced. And you need to find a way to sort of, you don't necessarily have to differentiate yourself from all the 10,000 people also sitting in the exam, but you need to make sure that your answer says something of note. You don't want to be just fluffing off about history and whatever. You want to be answering the question in a way that'll get the marker to be like immediately, yes, they answered the question. You don't want to have you don't want to leave any doubt in the marker's mind that you didn't understand what the topic was or what the entire study was about. This whole section is just, you have to be very disciplined in short answer questions. And that comes with practice. So if you have never been good at short answer or source analysis, the only way to get good at that is by practicing it. So, the different topics that we'll go through for today are firstly the collapse of the Weimar Republic, consolidation of power, Nazi ideology, prominent individuals, methods of control, impact on German life, opposition, and then we'll go to the more exam technique based stuff. It's important to understand that the collapse of the Weimar Republic was happening at the same time as the rise of Nazi power, and they both fed into each other. So the instability of the Weimar Republic impacted the rise of the Nazi Party, but also the rise of the Nazi Party helped lead to the downfall of the Republic. Also, another side thing that has nothing to do with history, just a little admin thing, is if you see me looking here to this side right here, I have a monitor up with the writing that's just a bit bigger than on the screen right in front of me. So if I'm looking there, that's just because I need to see it better, or my camera is like covering something on this side, so I have to look here to see it fully. But yeah, that's that out of the way. So we'll talk about the Weimar Republic. First off, what was it? So basically, they had the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II and the abolition of the monarchy, which meant that they had no real power system, no structure at all, which meant that there was chaos. When you don't have structure, there's always political unrest and chaos, which meant there was a need for a new system. So the first thing that happened was the leftist groups fought over what new system was going to be adopted. So you had people who wanted democracy versus people who wanted socialism, and all these different conflicting ideas just came out, and all of a sudden democracy wins. This guy Philip Scheidemann, Don't know how to say their name. I might be mispronouncing a lot of German words today because, as you can see, I'm not German. I did do German for a year in high school, but I am in no place to be able to pronounce German words. So if I mispronounce things, please forgive me. You'll probably mispronounce them at some point too. I barely ever say these words out loud. I just write them, so I know really, like, I know how to spell German words. I just don't know how to say them. Anyway, so the SDP, they declare a new republic and appoint a chancellor, and in order to kind of appease everybody, what happens is they grant the army autonomy, and they said, you can have this freedom if you help us control the opposition from the left, and that led to the establishment of the Freikorps, which are just these units of the military that were volunteers. And most of these people that volunteered were just people who wanted to stop the chaos, quell the left, and try to stabilize this new system that they were trying to bring in. Elections were held on the 19th of January 1919, so a very long time ago, and the SDP won the most seats, but it was not a majority, and they formed a coalition with the Democrats because they wanted democracy, and the Catholic Centre Party so that they could have a majority of the government. Now, that's really important, the formation of coalitions. So, that was one of the key weaknesses of the Weimar Republic. The SDP, they had the most seats, but not a majority. So in order to have a majority government, they had to make these connections with these other parties in order to get the way to get what they wanted. So yeah, and the Weimar Republic was then born. We had a president and a chancellor, and yeah, had a president and a chancellor, and had this new system. What could possibly go wrong? The Nazi Party. So, Hitler was the leader by 1921. He designed the banner. He did the 25-point program to talk about how the party was going to build its following and how it was going to use its platform. It is important to note that, like, it's kind of been a thing over the years to talk about how Hitler's rise to power was solely because he got rejected from art school that one time. And while that is like a funny little piece of trivia, that's really not how it happened at all. Lots led to the rise of Hitler as the Nazi dictator that he became to be. But it is important to note that other members tried to stop this rise to power because they thought it was too dictatorial, because they thought that he was too controlling. Who would have thought? But he offered his resignation because people were telling him to, like, not be the leader. But then, like, they were like, no, sorry, you can't not be the leader because you're so important to the party. And this just made Hitler officially the dictator of the Nazi Party. And there was no more committee. He just was like, okay, I'll take the entire control. I'll completely be in power. And once he had that dictatorial power, he didn't need the committee's approval for anything anymore. So that's where the problems start. But Nazi Party membership grew rapidly, and most of this is because of Hitler. Most of it was because of Hitler. He had great public speaking skills, was quite charming with the crowds, and very, very well known for being able to change his approach to gaining power depending on his audiences. So obviously at the time where they were quite unstable, the First World War had just happened, lots of people were looking for someone to rely on and to believe in, and Hitler just became that person for a lot of people because of his charm and public speaking skills. And manipulation, his ability to manipulate audiences by adapting to those audiences. So by 1923, there were 55,000 members of the Nazi Party. Now, as I said before, it's important to understand that the Weimar failure was equivalent to the Nazi Party success. So, sorry, I'm just changing my seating position. So the Nazi Party often capitalized on the failures of the Republic in order to secure popular support, and this came in many, many forms. Just because the Weimar Republic was such a mess, lots going wrong, not much going right. So it's very, very easy for the Nazi Party to pick out flaws and show the public these flaws in order to gain support. Constitutional flaws were probably the biggest part of it, and that's because of proportional representation. So talked about this before, the importance of the coalitions being developed, but what proportional representation was that the number of votes that you got, the percentage of votes, would be the percentage of seats that you got, which meant that it was really hard for parties to secure a majority, because let's say you got 30% of the votes. Well, that is the most that any party has gotten. So let's say 30 was the most, everyone else got under 15. You're still never going to have a majority, because you'll always be, the max would be 30%. So it made it really hard for laws to get passed, because not everyone could agree on something. The most people agree on would be like 30%. One party would all vote for something, but since everyone else disagreed, nothing could get passed. So this made people quite frustrated, because since laws were really hard to get passed, no real development was happening under the Weimar Republic. So it led to the development of coalitions. In order to achieve a majority, lots of people chose to merge parties, align themselves with smaller parties, just so they can get over that 50% mark. And once they were over the 50% mark, they were able to get a majority, and then laws could be passed. So while this meant that the larger parties would have to sometimes compromise their own beliefs and change their plans in order to accommodate for smaller parties' considerations and giving them some power, the larger parties were happy to do that as long as they were able to get a majority. But what this meant was that those smaller parties now had way too much power. So if you look at the little diagram, you can see 15% of the vote plus 40% of the vote. That makes 55%, which is a majority. But since they become a coalition, that 15% now, instead of just being the smallest party with only 15% of the seats, the least amount of votes, by forming that coalition with the larger parties, they are now given the equivalent of 55% of voting power. And that meant that they have a disproportionate amount of power and a greater likelihood of overthrowing stuff. So while the development of coalitions was all about making a majority for the larger parties often forgot to think about what it meant for those smaller parties that they were combining with. It meant that they got the equal amount of power, and it was a bit risky. Article 48 was another constitutional flaw that was abused, and it was just that a president could rule without consulting the Reichstag in an emergency. And this made a lot of people upset, just because it was like, it's basically a dictatorship. If the president could rule, the president could change anything about the government in an emergency. They could change whatever they wanted without consulting anybody else if they deem it an emergency. So that clause was making quite a lot of people angry, and it was quite easy to abuse that in order to form a dictatorship, which is what happened. So the Treaty of Versailles was at the end of World War One, basically all the countries involved in the war came together and just said, let's make sure this never happens again. And when they said that, they needed someone to blame. And the people of the Treaty of Versailles said they wanted to blame Germany for the First World War. And they were meant to pay 132 billion gold marks in reparations. They were going to give up some of their territory. They had to keep the demilitarized zone. They had to give up lots of land. They had to give up lots of their military. And then they also had to do the War Guilt Clause, which was just them signing away saying that, yes, Germany was responsible for the First World War. And obviously, that was not something that a lot of the Germans believed, and they found it quite unfair because the reparations, especially, that was a really big problem for Germany. If you imagine a war-torn economy, like they were just at this war from 1914 to 1919, 5 years of straight warfare. They were already having a really hard time in the First World War in terms of like the war conditions, poverty. Just it was war times is a bad time for everyone. Both sides of the war were feeling it, but the fact that afterwards they had to pay reparations, it meant that those war times kind of continued. The economic instability continued after the war. There was no rebuilding the economy from the war because the economy was being bashed down by the fact that they had to pay reparations, and so many reparations as well, because they were the solely responsible country for the war, um, because of the War Guild Clause. So lots of people weren't really happy with the harshness of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany and what it meant for the citizens, particularly with the economic climate at the time. So they deemed the Weimar Republic the November criminals. So the November criminals were the people who signed the Treaty of Versailles. And they kind of labeled it the stab in the back legend. So what this meant was that the leftist politicians, um, the communists, the Jews, they all of them, they were responsible for the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, and they wanted to sabotage Germany and stab Germany in the back, and that's why they signed the Treaty of Versailles. Um, yeah, so Hitler was a very strong proponent of this legend, this idea, and a part of the Nazi campaign became reversing the Treaty of Versailles. And this was a massive, massive aspect of Nazi appeal because lots of people also disagreed with the Treaty of Versailles. They found it unfair that I'm not German, they had to be paying reparations, that they had to give up territory, that they had to limit their military. It also made them feel quite vulnerable because with the lessened military and tons of countries hating Germany because of the War Guilt Clause in the First World War, made them feel quite vulnerable in that in the case of another war, would they be able to survive? Because Germany had fallen down from being this big power into being this measly little place that required aid from the Americans to be able to pay their reparations. So, a large part of the Nazi appeal came from people going, yes, I hate the Treaty of Versailles. Let's abolish it. Let's reverse it. Let's turn it on our enemies. And that's what Hitler was promising. Hitler told everybody, if you stick with me, I will get rid of the Treaty of Versailles. So people stuck with him. And then came the beer hall push. So Hitler and some other people, they wanted to take over Munich, and it was last minute called off. So that made Hitler quite upset. So he went to a beer hall where a meeting was taking place and just kind of declared a national revolution. A bunch of people decided to support Hitler, but because of this national revolution, kind of violence broke out, commotion happened, and the SA, They take control of the army, the headquarters, local newspaper. The Nazis entered Munich and they were met by armed reinforcements. Hitler's arrested, which is really massive. Hitler is arrested, Nazi Party is banned, and Hitler speaks at his trial. And when Hitler speaks at his trial, he makes a speech that is quite appealing to the masses because he used it as a way to generate support. And what he said was on the news for weeks while he was in jail. Jail was where he wrote Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf means my struggle in German, and it was basically a book that talked about his struggle. What was he struggling about? Most of it was his disdain for the November criminals, the way that the Weimar Republic was. Just, it was a very angsty take on the world he was in, and it all came down to blaming the communists, the Jews, anyone basically, blaming everybody for his struggle. And basically what this whole experience in jail and with the party being banned and this whole beer hall push situation, it taught Hitler that revolution was not the way forward because revolution would not work. The SA was too powerful. There was too much chaos to have a revolution work the way that he wanted it to. So they wanted to gain power legitimately and constitutionally. So the rise of the extreme right, unlike, let's compare it to the Russian Revolution where Stalin rose to power. That occurred because of rebellion and revolution. There was no rise of the Communist Party in the actual government beforehand. The Nazi Party is different because of that. They gained power legitimately. And by legitimately, I mean constitutionally, because legitimately usually means like you're not killing people and you're not, yeah. The Nazi Party went through it constitutionally. So the occupation of the Ruhr was a major event. What happened was the Weimar Republic was struggling to keep up with paying reparations. And that's just because, the war-torn economy, kind of hard to recover from that. So, yeah, they were struggling. But 1923, the French were like, you're not paying enough. Telegraph poles had not been delivered, other things had not been delivered, the reparations were falling behind. And because of this, France and Belgium, they sent in troops to occupy the Ruhr, which was the most important part of the economic revival of Germany. So it was known as the industrial heartland of Germany. And basically that was what was rebuilding Germany. And the Weimar ordered that with the occupation of the Ruhr by France and Belgium, people should resist. They should have worker strikes. They didn't want violence because that would be like war. They didn't want violence, didn't want aggression from the Germans. They wanted workers just to stop working. They wanted to stop the Ruhr from working while it was being occupied. And this meant the industrial heart stopped beating. And, while it did what it did, it showed the French that, it stopped the French aggression. It was passive resistance to France. But production numbers fell dramatically, and it was horrible. The occupation lasted for 2.5 years, so it wasn't just like a week-long strike. It was 2.5 years of this industrial heartland just being abandoned by its workers, such that industrial production fell. Germany had nothing else going for it. absolutely nothing else. So the economy just went hyperinflation. They printed more money. They had a very, very tricky economic situation on their hands. The government just, yeah, they printed more money, and everybody knows that you don't print more money in that situation. Paper money was basically rendered useless. People just went back to bartering. Um, yeah, hyperinflation just sucked. A loaf of bread costed 201, like, I don't even know that number, just many, many marks when they costed 0.63 in 1918 during the war. It costed less during literal war times where the economy was in tatters. And this affected different groups in different ways, but most of the ways were negative. So, unemployment, unable to, like, yeah, they're unemployed, unable to provide, unable to afford prices of most things. Middle class, they just lost all their savings and were unemployed, and then they couldn't afford rent. Upper class, they most of the time benefited, but for the middle class, the lower class, the working class, hyperinflation in the 1920s was actually a nightmare, and this caused a lot of sadness and a lot of pent up anger in the people of Germany that led to their willingness to support radical right groups like the Nazi Party. But Stresemann calls off the passive resistance in the rule because of all the chaos that it caused with hyperinflation, and then introduces Rentemark, which could help. But then the Great Depression happened. So as I mentioned before, the US were helping a lot with Germany's reparations. And since they were helping a lot with the reparations, they were super intertwined, such that when the US fell, so did Germany. The US took back all of their loans when the Great Depression hit because they were suffering from their own issues. And so Germany was left with nothing. Absolutely nothing. And in 1932, basically all of the industrial production in Germany was like 60% of what it was before. Mass unemployment. The Weimar government responded so poorly. They raised taxes in a society where there was so much unemployment, so many people with wage cuts. It made people more mad. And then they decided to invoke Article 48, which, as mentioned before, was one of the main constitutional flaws of the Weimar Republic. And then Hindenburg dissolves the Reichstag, calls for new elections, and by 1932, the Nazi Party went from having 12 seats to 107. So now we talk about the Nazi consolidation of power. Hindenburg was the president at the time of Hitler appointed as chancellor, and Hindenburg was hesitant because having a chancellor that represented the party with the most seats kind of concerned Hindenburg, as it should. But basically, Hindenburg didn't appoint Hitler straight away. He appointed Schleicher instead, von Schleicher. I don't know how to say it. But Hitler had a lot of connections, and most importantly, it was von Papen. Now, former Chancellor von Papen was the guy for Hitler to kind of weave his way into being Chancellor. So, yeah, Hitler was kind of being, yeah, Hitler was kind of seen as someone that could be easily manipulated, a political novice, which meant that von Papen thought that Hitler would be easier to control if Hitler was in the government. It was much easier to do that when he wasn't just a radical on the side. So Hindenburg, on the 30th of January 1933 is a very important year for Hitler and the Nazi Party. Hindenburg appoints Hitler as the Chancellor. And then Hitler went, well, political power is mine. Hitler just knew that he consolidated a very good spot that day. And it was made even better on the 27th of February 1933 when the Reichstag building was set on fire. So they blamed it on the communists. Why? Propaganda. But the communists denied any affiliation with the fire, so it could really be Hitler setting this fire himself in order to spread this myth about communist outrage. But basically, it justified Hitler's extension of the decree for the protection of German peoples, and the Reichstag fire decree, not degree. And this just meant that people did not have freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to assembly, or many of the constitutional protections they had before. So yeah, Hitler just got rid of people's rights with this fire decree. They just got rid of their rights and used it to use the fire to justify getting rid of the Communist Party, because since they made it out that the Communist Party was responsible for the fires, no one really liked the Communist Party anymore, and it justified the persecution of them. It's like they started the fire, that's a crime, they have to be arrested, and also their party has to be banned. So, they got rid of their political opponents really easily in just one day. It's very efficient. Then the Enabling Act happened the next month, 24th of March 1933. Now, I will say, before I get on to talking about the Enabling Act, it is very important to know the dates that these laws were enacted. So, you've got the 28th of February, and you've got the 24th of March. So, 24th of March, it was Hitler becoming dictator day. So, what this meant was that the Enabling Act made sure that Hitler did not need the approval of the president in order to pass laws. So it was passed through the Reichstag, and it was signed by Hindenburg, so it was a legal dictatorship. How did that happen? It's a mystery. Basically, Hitler made a bunch of deals. Again, remember that Hitler was very manipulative and very good at changing his tactic to tell the audience what they wanted to hear, which is very dangerous. But Hitler made a bunch of deals with a bunch of parties and important people, and it convinced them to vote in favor of the Enabling Act, which just made Hitler the dictator. The only party that did not vote in favor of the Enabling Act were the Social Democrats, and they obviously failed because the Enabling Act was passed. But on the 14th, by the 14th of July 1933, all parties were banned from operating. That Enabling Act just gave Hitler the ability to make his own laws without consulting anybody, without seeking approval, without needing a majority. Just made him the leader. He made himself the government, basically. And there was the Reichskonkordat, which was a part of securing this power. So it was signed by von Papen and the Cardinal Secretary of State on the 20th of July 1933, and it meant that the Roman Catholic Church in Germany was guaranteed rights as long as they subjected to the authority of the party. They weren't allowed to speak out on their beliefs against the party. They had to just live with the party, support the party, and the party would then allow the Catholic Church to keep on going. But, as in regular Nazi Party fashion, they breached the agreement straight away. They just stated that they had to teach anti-Semitic values in schools now, so it violated the love thy neighbor belief of the Roman Catholic Church. And then at some point in Hitler's power, they banned the church youth groups and only made Hitler Youth legal. And yeah, Catholic Church, the Pope released a response to the breaches of the treaty. But honestly, it meant nothing to Hitler because Hitler was just, he had a hold on everything else, such that the Catholic Church's disapproval of Hitler and the Nazis had very limited sway over the German population compared to Hitler's own power. The Night of Long Knives is a night on the 30th of June to the 2nd of July 1934, but if you're going to remember a date, you should remember the 30th of June. It was Hitler's purge of his own party. Usually when you think of purges, you think of it happening to the enemy, whereas this, it was happening to Hitler's own party, which is insane. And basically, you just murdered and arrested the SA. So there were officially 85 fatalities, but if you like really count, it's more than 200. And most of them were assassinated by the SS or the Gestapo. And what happened, what led up to the Night of Long Knives was the army. The army was, if you remember what I said before, the army had quite influential figures. They were big. They were quite influential because they were the army, and the army told Hitler that if the SA, which were like the military kind of the party, if they were suppressed, the army would support Hitler, and Hitler really wanted that support from the army. And the army, in turn, if the SA was suppressed, would be given the sole position of like the armed force of the state. And the leaders of the SA, particularly Ernst Röhm, who was the leader, they were the most targeted group because Hitler was worried that the SA was starting to become its own side of it's like a subset of the party. They were worried that the SA had taken a more socialist aspect, a more socialist perspective on the entire party than Hitler wanted, and then just decided to murder them and arrest them in a public kind of setting as well, just to show that he had the power to kill literally anyone without facing any consequences, just because that was who he was. That was the power he had. You couldn't arrest Hitler. Hitler was the government at this point. So yeah. Then this was all made even more solid when Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934. Hitler then combined the role of the president and the chancellor to become the Führer. And the Führer of Germany was a dictator. He abolished the office of president. He just became, again, the government. Hitler was officially, in law and in title, the dictator of Germany. And this leads to Nazi ideology. Now, Nazi ideology is, before we get started, a little disclaimer, something we need to understand without condoning. Now, Nazi ideology is one of the worst things you will ever hear about. It should not be appealing. If you agree with any parts of the ideology, you need to check something out. But what we need to be able to do is explain why these aspects of the Nazi ideology appeal to the German society, given the context. So, like, you shouldn't be going, yeah, they would have agreed to hate the Jews because that's what they believed. No, they needed someone to blame, and they were manipulated into finding the Jews as a common enemy. So, like, you need to think about it in the context of the war-torn, post-World War One economy, mindset, all of that. You need to think about that. But yeah, the Nazism as the ideology was pointed out initially in 1920 in the 25 Points of the Nazi Party and in Mein Kampf in 1924. And basically Nazi ideology. As the party built, it became more of just Hitler's ideology. It was really just the beliefs of Hitler, and it's deeply embedded in all of his speeches, writings, policies, all of that. Um, so yeah, his the ideology was quite fluid. It usually shifted depending on his agenda, which meant there were lots of inconsistencies and contradictions. But since it was authoritarian, since Hitler was a dictator, it was really just whatever the Fuhrer wants, he gets. So it didn't really matter that he constantly changed his mind about stuff, constantly had contradictions. That didn't matter because Hitler was the boss. Um, so, first two parts are nationalism and Volksgemeinschaft. So, Volksgemeinschaft is just an extreme form of nationalism, which is solely about safeguarding German interests. So, there was nothing about being a diplomat and improving relations with other countries. If it deemed to counter Germany's interest, then they were ignored. It was only if those decisions and improving relations improved Germany's interests that they were actually brought up. And the Nazis were ethno-nationalists, so they thought that being a German was to do with your blood, and nothing else. Volksgemeinschaft meant people's community, and it just meant that all the Germans should unite together, and by Germans, it means Germans by blood, not Germans who live in Germany. Because people who live in Germany, that would include the Jews and the communists and black Germans. That was not included in the people's community. The belief was that the Germans, as in the people with German blood apparently, would unite to work together and reduce inequality and reduce the effects of this common enemy, which were the Jews, the communists, so and so. So that was Volksgemeinschaft, and this was a really key part of Nazi propaganda. Then we have Führerprinzip, which is pretty much totalitarianism. So Führerprinzip was the leader principle, and it just meant that what the Führer says goes. If the Führer says something, it doesn't matter if it's above the law. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's not the law, it's above the law. And it just meant that Hitler was the state. He was the government, and he was the political father figure for everyone. All the other political parties were banned, so no one really held political influence like Hitler did. And it meant that no activity or organization in Germany was ever really independent. It was all linked to the Fuhrer. And in order to maintain this kind of leadership role and this principle of whatever I say goes, censorship and propaganda had to happen. And this was a part of the totalitarian regime. It helped develop his cult of personality, and it was just, yeah. Hitler was the first and last person to be a Führer, which is just a fun little fact. The next part is quite interesting. Social Darwinism. So Darwinism is all about evolution. If you do biology, you'd know about evolution. But social Darwinism was putting evolution in a social setting to be this kind of racist pseudoscience. So you had words, the Übermensch and the Untermensch. And the Übermensch was the superior race, and the Untermensch were the inferior one. So Übermensch were Aryan Germans, so Nordic heritage, and the Untermensch were anyone else, basically. This justified Lebensraum and the horrific treatment of the non-Aryan groups. So the Holocaust was all justified based on this idea of social Darwinism. And then there was racial hygiene, or eugenics. And this just meant that biological techniques were used to improve this master Übermensch, the master race. And this required the cleansing of the inferior races. So this meant that there was mass euthanasia, forced sterilization, and laws preventing any relationships between Aryan race and the Untermensch, so the inferior race. So this was all to purify the German blood, basically, and try to keep the Aryan race as pure as possible and as biologically perfect as Hitler wanted. Is this all messed up? Yes, very much so. But was this is what was propelled by the Nazi Party. So kind of stuck. And then there's Lebensraum. So the Lebensraum or Lebensraum, it means living space. And this meant that they basically wanted to expand, they wanted to take over the world. It was about providing more room for the growing German race, and it wanted to get rid of those inferior groups in order to take up their space so that it could be used for Germans, because they're inferior. They don't deserve that space. They're using space that is rightfully for the Germans. So, yeah, it was closely tied to social Darwinism. And it was used to justify the colonialism in Eastern Europe. So, yeah, it stipulated that populations of Eastern Europe needed to be permanently removed to give way for the German race. It also helped with justifying some allies that they made. If a place had really like large proportions of German blood and like the Aryan kind of German blood, then they would expand to that area, form allies, so they could come together and make one massive Germany. Autarky is something that probably appealed the most to the masses, and this is economic self-sufficiency. They didn't want outside assistance, because the last time Germany had outside assistance was the US helping pay for reparations, and that led to the absolute economic collapse after the Great Depression. So they wanted economic self-sufficiency. Lots of people did. And while this was not immediately achieved, they continued to try and pursue this through international trade. And what the Nazis hoped to come from autarky was creating more jobs to stop unemployment or lower unemployment so that the Germans had jobs. So why did people support this? It's a great question. Lots of historians have thought about it really hard and have questioned it for all their life, because that's their job as historians. But it came down to wanting to save the nation. So Eric Hobsbawm is a Jewish communist historian, and his words that I could see how they'd become passionate about saving the nation. I could see I might have become a Nazi. Like, a Jewish communist historian said that. So it meant that it had, like, if you think about it, at the time, that the whole world to them was like collapsing. Everything was fundamentally falling apart. The Germans could see no future other than one where a leader steps in and picks up all the pieces and saves Germany. And that's what Hitler looked like to a lot of people. So yeah. And there was also, yeah. It was also very, a well-rounded approach, I guess, because things like their anti-communist, anti-socialist beliefs that appealed to the rich people in Germany because they didn't want to share their stuff. So again, the different aspects of the Nazi ideology were used to target different groups of society in order to convince them to support Nazism. So next thing we talk about is the role of prominent individuals, and this is my favorite part of the syllabus just because I think that it's the easiest to remember. First we have Goebbels, and another thing I should say is there have been times in the past HSCs where they give like little cartoon drawings of the different prominent individuals, and you have to talk about who's in the drawings and whatever. It's important to know what the individuals look like. They usually have quite exaggerated features. Goebbels usually looks like this pointy short man. So yeah, just take a note of their features, as well as their role in the Nazi Party. Goebbels is in my opinion, the most important person other than Hitler himself, and that's because he was the Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Um, Goebbels controlled the press, controlled like how the arts were expressed, and Goebbels was most responsible for consolidating and creating the Führer myth. And the Führer myth was basically just this idea propelled to the nation that was like, Hitler is saving us. Hitler is the best person in the world. Hitler is so cool. That idea, that very, very dramatized and very exaggerated portrayal of Hitler's goodness and heroism, all of that was done by Goebbels. Goebbels was Hitler's biggest fan in the media, and he was the first president of the Right Culture Chamber, which was just this group that controlled the press, and propaganda was Goebbels' thing. Propaganda was his thing. Speeches, writings, pamphlets, leaflets, radio broadcasts, making sure that films, music, theatre, everything had to support Hitler and had to support the party. And Goebbels made sure that all forms of cultural expression were inherently intertwined with Nazi ideology at the point of Nazi power. Hermann Goring. Hermann Goring was a former military officer, which then ended up being the commander of the SA. You might be thinking, didn't the SA all get shot up and arrested and assassinated back in the Night of Long Knives? Yes, but the SA kind of continued in a different way. You had the SA, the SS, and the Gestapo. It's kind of hard to differentiate them, but yeah. Anyway, Goring was named the president of the Reichstag in 1932, and then formed the Gestapo in in his role. And then that's in the formation of the Gestapo. That's when the idea of the concentration camps was formed, and concentration camps actually started to be established. Now, it's important to note that concentration camps at the very start of the Nazi Party and the Nazi regime, it started off as just kind of like a jail for political opponents. It wasn't what we think of concentration camps. Now that we know more about Nazism and what happened in World War II, the concentration camps that were once just for holding opponents became death camps. And one idea led to the other. So Hermann Goring is who we blame for the horrors of Auschwitz and all the other camps that were used in World War II. So as a leader of the Gestapo, he was also critical in the Night of Long Knives, and in the war, he was the commander of the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe, which is a funny word, but it's just the Air Force. And in 1939, Hitler was like, you are going to be the next Führer when I die. Luckily for us, luckily for the world, Hitler was overthrown. Germany is no longer controlled by a Führer. Goring never got his chance to be Hitler's successor. Then we have Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler was the leader of the SS. So I said there was the SA, the SS, and the Gestapo. So the SS was the Schutzstaffel, which started long before the Nazis got real power, but Heinrich Himmler was appointed in 1929, and the SS was like Hitler's private army. They're the bodyguards, and they bodyguarded other powerful Nazi leaders, but it started off as a small body, and then it became a very large body that just used terror to terrorize the population into conformity. So Himmler introduced two new things into the SS. First, protecting internal security for the country, which meant stopping anyone that was trying to overthrow from within the country. Lots of whisperings about communism, or any whisperings about communism or any political unrest that was quashed by the SS. Then the other thing was maintaining guardianship over racial purity. So this just meant they were really, really important in maintaining that final solution. The SS took control of German police forces, and in 1933 and 1934, he kept on the concentration camp system. And yeah, in 1934, Hitler announced that the SS was now an independent organization, and the leader, Himmler, was subordinate to the Fuhrer. Then we have Rudolf Hess. Now, Rudolf Hess, I don't really care about Hess that much. I never cared about Hess, just because I think that it's just like he's kind of like an assistant. He was the deputy Fuhrer of the Nazi Party, but that shouldn't really exist if Fuhrer is a dictator. So it didn't really have that much to do other than just being the Fuhrer when Hitler didn't want to be there. So it meant appearing on Hitler's behalf at appointments, rallies. It meant making speeches on his behalf. It meant sometimes signing on behalf of Hitler. Hess was not really important during the war because he was arrested in Britain and held as a prisoner of war for all of World War II, basically. So Hess didn't do much other than help in the early stages of the Nazi Party to, take over for Hitler. But one of the main things that he did do was sign into law the Nuremberg laws, and the Nuremberg laws were massive. They were huge for the country. So that was probably his most important contribution. Then we've got Röhm. So Ernst Röhm, you might remember this name from the Night of Long Knives slide, but Ernst is someone that was very influential during the early years of the party, but not later on because he was killed. He was given the role of the chief of the SA in 1931, and this gave him a lot of power because the SA had quite a lot of power. And Röhm suggested that the army should be incorporated into the SA, which was a very unpopular opinion. Then, when Hitler reduced the SA and pledged to reduce it further to gain the army's support, because the army wanted to be like the sole kind of military group, which the SA were at the time, Hitler was then like, well, Röhm's a traitor, and had him arrested and killed. So really, it's nothing that Röhm did specifically to Hitler that led to his assassination, his murder. It was really just Hitler making a very strategic move. He wanted to make sure that he had power in the long run, and he couldn't afford traitors, which he thought Röhm was. So now we're going to talk, wait, let me just check I didn't, yeah. There's also a bunch of other prominent individuals that I haven't mentioned. Those were the main ones. I do really like to learn about Albert Speer, who was the architect, and I think he's just really important because, not important, but really interesting because all the architect was based off the Roman Empire, the longest standing empire, and Hitler wanted to be as powerful as the Roman Empire, which is why he wanted the architecture to reflect that. So Albert Speer was important for helping cultivate the image of the empire, of Germany as a power through architecture, which is really interesting. But he didn't really have much of a role other than building buildings and designing buildings, so we're not going to talk about him that much. We have the Nuremberg laws as the methods of control. So we've moved on to the methods of control part of the syllabus, which is the most asked about, I think. But the Nuremberg laws were a way that they exercise control, and laws always had to coordinate with the Nazi ideology, and it meant that Hitler had the most power, basically. There was also the Volksgerichtshof, which was the People's Court, and it just meant that Hitler was allowed to like bypass the Supreme Court in order to try opponents of his regime. The Nuremberg laws were the key laws that just institutionalized anti-Semitism. It was split into two parts. The first part was the Reich citizenship law, which just meant that German citizenship was revoked from Jews and it made them subjects of the state. It meant that status of the Jew was determined by ancestry, not religious and cultural adherence, which is an interesting choice. And yeah, it just meant they weren't really people in the eyes of Germany anymore. And that also helped them justify the final solution. Then the next part was the law for the protection of German blood and honor, which is the bulk of it, I'd say. And this is what prohibited the marriage and any relationships between Jews and racial Germans, because it was defilement any other way. And then it was extended to include a bunch of other groups later on. So it wasn't just Jews that weren't allowed to be with racial Germans. It was basically anyone that wasn't racial German could not be with them. It had to be racial German on racial German because they wanted to purify the Aryan race. And the law for the protection of German blood and honor, it included a bunch of other kind of laws that were allowing for the discrimination of Jews. It justified it, yeah. Another way that the Nazis exercised control was through propaganda and the cult of personality. So the Hitler myth as this guy who was the mighty defender of Germany, the mighty hero who would fix Germany, save Germany, get rid of the criminals, restore it to its former power. That was the Hitler myth. And all forms of communication were opportunities to spread this message. So the radio, cinema, at rallies, at the Berlin Olympics in 1936. Yeah, so that was actually quite interesting example. So the Olympics were going to be held in Berlin, and the people who like ran the Olympics were like, can you not propaganda this? Can you just maybe like chill out while we're there? And Hitler was like, obviously, no, of course I'm gonna put the banners of the Nazi Party all over the walls. So yeah, it wasn't just the German people being subjected to this propaganda, it was the whole world. And then propaganda was then embedded into the education system. They were taught anti-Semitism from very early on in their education. They were just, the minds of the young were molded into being supporters of Nazism. So Nazi propaganda started young and it was very successful. Censorship was another form of control, and this just meant that viewpoints weren't allowed to be communicated. So they got rid of freedom of the press and freedom of speech already, but censorship went beyond that. It meant that all communication was very, very heavily controlled. If you had a script for a movie, it had to be censored. It had to go through a system where people would check to make sure that it followed the Nazi way. And then once they were sure that it would communicate the right message, only once they went through it multiple times, pre-production and post-production, did they let the movie out into the world. Same thing with books. And it didn't even go so far as like censoring all new material to come out. They had a book burning in 1933, which is very, very early on in the Nazi kind of power. In 1933, they burnt a ton of books. They had over 25,000 books that were deemed inappropriate. They chucked it into a fire, and they were like, no one is ever going to consume that knowledge, because they weren't even allowed to think anti-Nazi. If they thought anti-Nazi, they were anti-Nazi, and then they were killed. And that leads me to the next part, terror and repression. Terror and repression was just a method of control whereby you supported the Nazis just because you were scared that if you didn't, you would die. A sense of fear was the main driver of support a lot of the time. The Gestapo was acting above the law. They were kind of their own body. They kind of did whatever they wanted, and this meant that they were just targeting people, Jews, communists, the usual targets, and yeah, since they were kind of made out to be like everywhere, that they had eyes and ears everywhere, they could hear everything you say. It created a culture of mistrust because people were encouraged to tell the Gestapo if they heard their neighbors speaking bad about the Nazis, or just anytime you felt unsafe and you felt like you couldn't trust anyone. And then you have the SS and the SA. The Kristallnacht was horrid. It was basically where a bunch of Jewish-owned businesses were bashed up. It means the night of broken glass. So it's because a lot of glass was broken that night because the windows of Jewish stores were broken. But it was just terror reigning over the Jewish community. Then concentration camps were made, and the SS took key positions in a bunch of industries. So you never really knew who was listening. The SS was almost always there operating things, so you were kind of scared into going along with the Nazi regime. And that's something you also have to consider when thinking about the Nazi regime. Some people did not believe in what the Nazi Party was propelling, but they were scared into just accepting it. And while that is in itself a form of supporting it, it's really easy to say I would go and rebel like people in the books did, or go and rebel like this group did. But it's actually really hard to. So, you have to think about all these different perspectives when you think about the power and authority segment. And now we get to talk about the impact on Nazi life. The impact on, German life under the regime. So cultural expression was very limited. Basically, culture was synonymous with Hitler. The Right Culture Chamber supervised everything that was coming out. All facets of German culture needed to be promoting Nazi ideals and justifying war and the final solution. Had one for film, music, theatre, radio, fine arts, press, writing, and you could not work professionally within those industries if you were not a member of those chambers. And to become a member of those chambers, you had to be approved in a very hefty process that looked at your ancestry to make sure you weren't secretly a Jew. And just it was very difficult to get into these chambers because it was very difficult to ever publish anything because it had to be about Nazi ideology. It had to be about anything that had to do with Hitler and how great he was and how great war was. So that was cultural expression. Now, religion. We talked already about the Concordat signed between the Catholic Church and the party, but there was a little bit more with religion. So pre-Nazi Germany was mostly Christian. It had 2/3 of the Protestant population and then 1/3 Catholic. And under the Nazis, they had very little religious freedom because the Nazis didn't want them to be worshipping a higher power like God. They wanted them to be worshipping the state, which is interesting choice. But not all religions were considered equal because of the Concordat. The Catholic Church were having a little bit more freedom than the rest of the religions out there, but the others were suppressed or banned or targeted and persecuted. Christianity was only tolerated when it was combined with Nazism. They made the Reich Church, the Nazi Party made the Reich Church, which was an attempt to get the Christians of the nation to support Nazism. And how they did that was unifying the Christian ideology and the Nazi ideology, which was overall a failure. The Confessing Church was another like religion, I guess, that was established to protest Nazi ideology. So when we talk about opposition, we might get into that. Workers were also significantly affected. A significant proportion um, of the Nazi Party knew this. They aimed to maintain support through the workers because the working class were the main class that boosted Nazi support in the first place because they were unhappy with their conditions under the Weimar Republic. So it was important for the party to ensure that the workers were happy. And they did this in quite clever ways. Um, yeah, they wanted to have very worker oriented reforms and policies, and they were willing to concede to the need of the workers in order to maintain their support because they knew just how much support they were gaining from the workers. So they reduced unemployment in 1933 through some laws, and then they had these things which were the Strength Through Joy and the Beauty of Work campaigns. Kraft für Freude was like the German word for it, and basically it meant that they had improved working conditions, and it meant that the more work that you did and the better you were at your job, the more benefits that you got. So they were offered things like subsidized holidays, cheaper cars, the Volkswagen, which was the people's car. They were given a bunch of off-duty luxuries in exchange for good work, and this was good for the working class because they were given better jobs because they reduced unemployment. They were given better working conditions, and from doing work, they were given benefits. So they were like, wow, I love the Nazi Party. They're doing so much for us. And this helped maintain Nazi Party support. They still experience oppression. So when they abolished trade unions, that meant it was much more difficult to change jobs, and it meant that things like strikes were just a bit hard to do when you're unhappy. So, yeah, abolition of trade unions was not the best move, but it was to do with the party gaining control of the working class after giving them all this stuff. And workers from minority groups were still treated really harshly, and many policies created harmed their businesses. So basically, the working class of the Übermensch, the superior race, they benefited from the Nazi regime. Everyone else, it still sucked. For the youth, the Hitler Youth is something you've probably heard about because it was quite infamous. Education was a powerful tool to help set a future for the Nazi regime. Teaching the children the Nazi way would mean that the future would be Nazi. That's what they thought. And in order to do this, the Hitler Youth was formed, which was this organization where Aryan children were recruited to be educated in Nazi principles. They were also doing these things like doing war games to help with war strategy making, tactics, that kind of stuff. And also they participated in lots of physical education, and basically all other youth organizations were merged into this Hitler Youth or banned. And it was an expectation at one point for membership to the Hitler Youth being compulsory. So in 1926, when it was formed, to 1936, it was compulsory by then. And it meant that you can make connections. So if you join the Hitler Youth, you would be able to get a job, basically. And without membership to the Hitler Youth, they'd think that you're rebelling and you wouldn't get a job. Membership was obviously not open to all individuals, only the Aryan race, and only if you were healthy and free from disease. So when we think of the Aryan race, most of the time because of the way it's been talked about in books and movies and all types of media. You think about the blonde hair, blue eyes that Hitler wanted, and that's true, but we also must remember that they wanted this perfect race, which meant that you had to be physically healthy and you couldn't be diseased. You had to do an eye test to get into the Hitler Youth or to get into the SS, because you couldn't be perfect if you had bad eyesight. You couldn't have any history of like really bad health conditions if you were asthmatic, diabetic, anything like that. That was seen as a weakness and imperfect and meant you couldn't be a part of it. So membership was restricted for those people. Girls had their equivalent. It was the League of German Girls or German Maidens. And this was very different to the Hitler Youth. While the Hitler Youth were taught war games, physical education, um, Nazi ideology, the women, they were allowed to do some sports, but it had to be the soft sports, things like gymnastics, they said. But they were taught ideology, but in relation to women. So it wasn't about, yeah, let's do war, let's do revenge. Their ideology classes were more about, let's respect our husbands, let's cook and clean, and be mothers to many, many children. That's what the League of German Girls was about. For women, as I talked about before, from a young age they were taught that their number one responsibility was to give birth a lot. It was to be a mother, to increase the Aryan population of Germany. And this meant that women had lots of incentives for birthing children. So they would get awards for however many children that you had. And the more children that you had, the more money that you'd get from the government, the less tax that you'd have to pay. You had better loans if you were married. Better loan deals if you were married, and even better if you had children. So lots of incentives for having children. And it also meant that you weren't allowed to prevent having children. So abortion was banned and birth control was limited. They made it really hard to get birth control. And this failed. There was an overall decline in birth rates during the Nazi regime. Not sure why, just because. In terms of occupations, strictly domestic, lots of women who had jobs during the war, because the men were out fighting, the women were at home, and some of them had to pick up jobs because the men were out fighting. As soon as the men came back from fighting and the Nazis came into power, in order to reduce unemployment, it meant firing the women and giving those jobs to men. So that was one way to reduce unemployment. And they were also discouraged from pursuing a higher education because they thought, you don't need that higher education. You're going to be a mother at home making meals for your husband. So, they weren't really encouraged to work. Then the feminine ideal was obviously the racially pure blonde hair, blue eyes that did not work outside of the domestic sphere and was married with many, many children. I'm talking at least 5 children to be ideal. The more children you had, the more awards that you'd get from Hitler, the more benefits that you'd get. Lots of propaganda for women was showing a woman with a family all happy and smiling with lots of money because the government paid her to have more kids. That's the impact on women. Then we have the impact on minorities. So the main minorities were obviously the Jews, and that one we know about, but there were also other minorities. So Romani people, they were killed. 85% of them were killed in a genocide and or sent to concentration camps. Homosexuals, they believed that it was a disease, so they sent them to concentration camps. And they also used it as an excuse to target any opponents or someone who was questioning the politics of the party. They just accused them of homosexuality, and then they'd be arrested and brought to a concentration camp, which is horrible. And then, as I talked about before, the mentally and physically disabled. So they were dubbed the Lebensunwertsleben. I don't know how to say that, but it means life unworthy of life. And that's just a horrible title for a person. It's just shocking. Like, that's actually horrible. But basically, they were, yeah, they were forcibly sterilized or killed, just so that they couldn't add to the next generation of the German population, because they wanted them to be perfect. Um, yeah. So we get to the main chunk of the impact of on German life, and this is the persecution of Jewish people. So they were, from very, very early on, um, the main minority, and they were scapegoats because they were the victim of the stab in the back myth. They were the people who stabbed Germany in the back. And in propaganda, from as early as propaganda went, Hitler presented the Jews as evil, inferior, and capitalist, and they were communist, and they were just, you did not want them around. That's how they were presented. And the top right there is a very famous piece of propaganda. You can see the communist symbol, which shows like the alignment of the Jews with the communists in the heads of the Nazi Party, which is interesting. But basically, between 1933 and 1939, the party passed over 400 pieces of anti-Jewish legislation, most notably the Nuremberg laws, but also a bunch of other ones regarding forced sterilization, um, just no rights at all. And the dehumanization of Jewish people was also perpetuated by propaganda, and there was state-sponsored physical violence against the Jewish population. So Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass in 1937, where they basically bashed up a bunch of like Jewish businesses, that was state-sponsored. They, like, the state asked people to go out and ruin the lives of Jewish people for a night. It was horrifying. So it was a really massive part of Nazi ideology, and it really impacted the life of Jewish people, as you can imagine. Like, they were just, yeah, shocking, and obviously sent to concentration camps later on. But yeah, it's just absolutely horrifying. So now we get to the opposition part. We're going to talk about how people opposed the Nazi regime. So civilians did. Um, it was the strongest among younger generations, particularly at unis. There was the Edelweiss Pirates, which were a bunch of kids who stopped Hitler Youth by dropping out of school, and since they were too young to be conscripted into the military, they were just able to live life without the Hitler Youth. And prior to World War II, they were viewed as just a little bit annoying, not really a massive threat. But as they became more radical, they became viewed as more of a threat, and therefore punishments became more severe. So they were arrested, sent to prison, concentration camps, or executed, especially if they were caught aiding oppressed people. So they were caught supporting the Jews, Jewish businesses, anything like that. Yeah. Another thing I forgot to talk about on the last slide about the persecution of Jewish people was those laws, those 400 pieces of anti-Jewish legislation. It happened gradually over those 6-7 years, and it started off by saying, yeah, they had no rights. They weren't allowed to work in certain jobs. They weren't allowed to work. Yeah, so like they weren't allowed to be doctors, weren't allowed to be lawyers. They weren't allowed to write. They weren't allowed to have businesses anymore. If they were to have businesses, they had to, at the front of their business, write very clearly that they were Jewish, so people knew not to buy from them. So, yeah, it wasn't just about like the concentration camps where they were where they went to be tortured and killed. It was public humiliation at some point as well, by making them like they if you were yeah if you were Jewish, you had to wear the Star of David, like a bunch of things to identify them as Jewish, so people knew that they were the enemy. That was a part of their life. Anyway, yeah. Another piece of opposition was the church. So I mentioned the Confessing Church before. This was formed to protest the Reich Church, and this caused 175 pastors to be arrested. And in response to, so yeah, that was the Confessing Church, not very successful. And then there was the Concordat, which was signed between the Catholic Church and the Nazi Party. Pope Pius I want to say 11th, I think. I can't really read Roman numerals that well, embarrassingly. But the Pope issued this like piece of writing um, that just said, yeah, I'm not really happy with how the party has respected the Concordat, because they didn't respect the Concordat. But it was written in German and smuggled into Germany. And then what happened was the Gestapo raided churches to confiscate copies. And then when Catholic priests took a stand against the Nazis, many were arrested for opposing the Nazis. The political left also opposed the Nazis. They were the largest opposition, and it included the communists, the Marxists, the socialists, trade unionists, and basically they just encouraged acts of sabotage and asked like workers to just not come and to be absent, not work, and all that stuff. And mainly communists were targeted by the Gestapo. Basically, 20,000 of the 32 and a half, 325,000 death sentences were for communists. So yeah, a very large portion of the death sentences were for communists. Okay, so that was the end of the content that we're going through today. Now we're going to talk about how to answer questions. So, how to answer questions. Structuring your response is the first thing that you need to consider. It depends on how many marks are allocated to it. So it's a short answer question. There's usually like 4 or 5. The first question is almost always just 3 marks. But you need to consider first of how many lines they give you. The amount of lines they give you is usually just a little bit smaller than the amount you need to write. So you want to fill the lines. If you really want a band 6, you'd go a little bit over. But just because you go a little bit over doesn't mean you will get a band 6, and just because you get a band 6 doesn't mean you went a little bit over. It's important to answer the question. So you have about 2 minutes per mark in the HSC, and that means that you'd usually spend like 5 minutes on a 4 marker, 10 minutes on a 7 marker, and then above 20 minutes on a 12 marker. Usually how it's structured is you have like a 3 marker, and then you have a 6 marker, and then you have, I don't know, like a 4 marker and a 12 marker. Usually you start off with the small marks, and then you end off with like a mini kind of essay. So the task words determine how you structure it. So the task words that usually come up are identify, describe, explain, outline, compare, assess, account, analyze, and evaluate. So obviously the lower end of marks, so your 3 or 4 marks, would be something like outline or describe. When they want you to talk about cause and effect or make a judgment, that's when you get more marks. So your explain, your assess, your analyze, your evaluate, those are usually more marks. And then if you get a 7 or an 8 marker, that's usually a compare question. So for 1 to 2 mark questions, get straight to the point. It's usually just like a 1 answer question or 1 sentence answer. So, sorry, I'm yawning. Ooh. Okay. Yeah, don't go overboard. Don't need to put too much detail unless specified in the question. 3 to 5 mark questions, you want some context some detail, but you don't want to go too far into analyzing every single cause and effect that has led to that event. You really just want to use a piece of evidence and, yeah, make your point about it. For each point that you make, you should have a piece of evidence to back it up, which will usually come from the sources that they give you in this section. It also, like with essays, it's the same kind of thing, but we'll talk about that later. And then for the more marks, you should have an introduction and then like 2 body paragraphs or 3 body paragraphs, depending on how many marks it is. Source integration is a skill that becomes very, very important in the HSC. Effective integration is not just quoting an entire source beginning to end and leaving it. It is making a very explicit connection to the point you are trying to make and just using it as evidence to whatever you were analyzing. It's not describing what was shown in the source, unless that's what the question is. It's about showing how your understanding is also shown in the source. So yeah, you can use like source A, source B. You don't have to like name who took the photograph or who drew the picture. You just say source A, source B, and then you want to, if you want, you can contextualize it, but just know that the marker is literally looking at the source while reading your thing. So you don't have to describe what they're looking at. You want to tell them what they're looking at, what that means, and what that means to your understanding and how that relates to your understanding. So what not to do is this photo of this happy woman with blonde children. You don't go, source A is a beautiful German family with a mother and children in black and white, all the figures just looking off into other people's faces. You don't do that. What you do instead is say it shows the ideal family unit, because that's what it's showing. It's not just showing us a picture of a mother and 3 children just to be like, it's a mother and 3 children. It's a German family photo. How lovely. It wants us to say it's an ideal family unit because they're of Aryan descent, as shown by the blonde hair, and they are conservatively dressed. The child is a part of the Hitler Youth. You can tell by the uniform. You can see that they are a traditional German family because the mother has multiple children. And there we go. That's what you say about it. And like you integrate it to whatever the question was asking. You also need to remember to integrate your own knowledge. So I'm talking about this as not just the short answer section, but as all of modern history now. But you want to not always rely on the source or the info from the question. So sometimes you'll need to bring out non-prescribed sources, and by sometimes I mean all the times in your essays. But it's very easily to over rely on prescribed sources in like in a question that's just about, in the first section, just about Hitler. But it's important to also work in your own knowledge. Use the source as a springboard, not as I only have to talk about this. So how to springboard, you work out what aspect of the syllabus you are on, then you work out what else is in that dot point, then you work out, oh, that dot point also leads to this issues. And then you go, oh, okay, well, the question can also fit to talk about those issues that I just realized. So when you're planning your response, you want to be able to springboard effectively to figure out what else there is to talk about. Because as I said in the first part, 10,000 people are doing this exact same section. They're doing the exact same questions on power and authority. Everyone is going to be writing about the same information. So the way that you work around this, the way you figure out how to differentiate yourself, is by springboarding, is by adding something else to the question. If the question is asking how was terror and repression used to exert control, and it's like an 8 marker, you're not going to talk about terror and repression for 8 marks. How you get some of those marks is by going, but they also exerted control in this other method through the form of censorship and propaganda. So you want to introduce new ideas, because some people, they won't know to introduce new ideas. They won't know that the question isn't just asking about terror and repression, it's asking about the entire dot point on methods of control. And since some people can't identify it, they won't be getting all those marks, whereas you will be able to see that and you will be able to get those extra marks. Then we need to talk about source analysis in terms of perspective, reliability, and usefulness. So, perspective. Perspective is an attitude, a worldview. Reliability is how much can we trust this source. So, in order to analyze a source, we need to talk about the relationship between perspective and reliability, and that makes it useful, whether or not that makes it useful or not. So, perspective plus reliability typically makes, typically makes usefulness. So, what can affect a source's perspective and reliability? You have contextual factors like your age, your gender, nationality, class is also an important one when it comes to source analysis, especially when talking about sources that are like primary sources from the Nazi regime, because sources from the perspective of the working class are often very pro-Nazism because of all the factors we talked about today. There's also factors on like purpose and motive. So who do they support? Personal prejudices, political agenda. So if it's a source straight from Hitler, you know that that's got a political agenda that we need to be questioning and analyzing when it comes to perspective and reliability. And then structural factors. So is it complete? Is it censored? Censored content is always very interesting. There'll be like blacked out phrases or words, and it's like, that probably means something. It means that Hitler probably went through it himself and got rid of anything that mentioned being a pacifist. I don't know. But basically, that's what that's what you need to look for. Structural factors as well. So next time you do a source analysis, make sure that you mention multiple of these. You don't want to just mention contextual factors or just mention age and gender. You don't want to just mention contextual, just political agenda. You want to mention a range to understand the entire perspective. So if we get a source from Hitler's perspective and you want to talk about like analyze that perspective or account for the perspective is usually how it's worded. You talk about, first of all, their profession as the literal Führer of Germany. You talk about their race and ethnicity and nationality. You talk about their beliefs, their political agenda, the fact that they were aiming to boost support for themselves. You talk about their personal prejudices, as in their own hate for the Treaty of Versailles, something like that. You talk about all these different factors that shape their perspective, not just one aspect of it. And it would, since he's trying to boost political support and morale, or whatever, since he's trying to boost himself up and boost support, the way he portrays himself would be, or the way he portrays the party would be in a very positive way compared to if we got a source about the Nazi Party from the perspective of a communist who is sitting in a concentration camp writing about how much they hate the Nazi Party. So all those things, like, those are two different worldviews, two different perspectives with two very different sets of factors that are contributing to that perspective. And both of them have very questionable reliability. Because on one end, you have Hitler tooting his own horn, going, I'm so great, I love the Nazi Party, and the Nazi Party's the best, because he is the Nazi Party. And then if you have a source from the communist perspective, it'd be like, I hate the Nazi Party, they chucked me in a concentration camp, and I'm really unhappy, I'm being persecuted. Those are both very unreliable sources because they're both very extreme and both very one-track mind, very only thinking about one thing. If you have a source that's from a historian talking about it years later, they're very far removed from the situation, they're usually a little bit more reliable just because their information has been a result of a bunch of different sources culminated into one where we can safely say that they were not under the influence of communist propaganda or Nazi propaganda at the time of writing. So lots of things influence perspective and reliability. For reliability, it's about asking ourselves these questions about when was it produced? Was it produced close to the time? Was it produced by someone involved? Was it produced to be published, or was it like someone's secret diary? What was the purpose? Is it an extract? What was it an extract of? Was it from extensive research? Was it peer reviewed, or was it just one man's opinion? So you need to ask all these things to assess the reliability. And once you ask these questions and answer them, you'll be able to tell whether or not something's reliable or not. Some of this is literally just like kind of not a gut feeling, but the more you look at sources, the more you realize, oh, this is reliable. This sucks. This is so not reliable. But just because something's not reliable doesn't mean it's not useful. Something can be really useful, but from the most biased perspective ever. So yeah. This is which of these two sources is more reliable. It changes depending on the question. So how reliable is it in reflecting German attitudes towards Bolshevism? It's factually unreliable because it's only one iteration of European culture, but it's reliable as evidence for the German attitudes towards Bolshevism. So it's very useful, just not factually reliable. So when you do source analysis, you want to use like a normal structure. You just need to integrate the source in the first sentence and then explain your judgment. And how you explain the judgment, you want to talk about perspective, reliability, and usefulness. And you want to provide an overview of the source, but don't describe the source. Again, discuss the why we care about the content, why we care about the source at all. And that's where you can really show how much you understand and also integrate your own knowledge and your own judgment. Also, don't forget to talk about the source type, and don't forget to talk about any limitations of the source as well, because you can go on praising a source for a long, long time if you want to, but the truth is, in the nature of history, is just everything is constructed with a little bit of bias. You can pretend that you're the most neutral person ever, that you as a historian don't pick a side at all, but deep down, there's always a little bit of bias. There's always a little bit of sway one way or another. That you're never going to get a completely neutral source. So there'll always be some type of problem. If you're like, yeah, if you're too close to the subject, you'll be considered like under the influence of the propaganda of the time. But if you're too far removed, you can argue that they didn't consider all the perspectives in their research. There's always something up with history, because history is a construct. Our understanding of history is made up of a bunch of other people's understandings of history, a bunch of other people's experiences at the time, told through their eyes at a time where they were probably struggling. So really, our understanding of history is such a mosaic of different things. So yeah, that's always something to consider as well, the construction of history. If you choose to do history extension or are doing history extension, that's something you'd probably think about in more detail. I don't think about the construction of history that often, but when I do source analysis, I do like to keep it in the back of my mind, just to go, do I really understand this? Or like how can I be sure? I like to ask myself that. I ask myself, like, if I saw this while I was learning this topic, what would I think? But yeah, lots of things going on in this head. So a practice question is this. It's Mussolini greeting the militia in Rome, and it says, describe the value of source B, investigating the nature of dictatorship that emerged in Italy. So this is from a sample paper or the past HSC or a trial paper. I can't remember where I got this from, but basically it's from the survey. It's about the dictatorships that emerged after World War One, and basically it's asking about the value of source B. So talking about source analysis, and it's 5 marks, which means it's quite a lot writing on it. But what you want to talk about in it is it's propaganda. You have at the front Mussolini high on a horse above everybody else. You have the cross. You have the Colosseum, which is a symbol of the ancient times, which is yeah, it's just a symbol of glory compared to Italy in its kind of economic shambled state. And it shows that it has the support of a power like the Catholic Church. Um, yeah, it's quite interesting. Um, so yeah, that's the stuff you'd kind of talk about. Now we're going to talk about essays. So, my biggest shock when coming into HSC Modern History was the whole essay process. The fact that I had to be able to write a full 25-mark essay on absolutely anything in the syllabus for the essay sections. And this means that you have to have a really good idea of what's going on in every single dot point, because any dot point in that syllabus could end up being an essay question. And while I do think that that is a sucky way to assess your understanding of history, because like when it comes down to it, I don't want to say it, but I will say it, it ends up being your ability to memorize as many essay scaffolds as possible, um, and as many historian quotes. And if you have a bad memory, it's going to be really hard to do well in an essay kind of format. There are ways to do well, it just makes it so much harder. And I think you can understand history, but not have to like write an entire essay on just one thing. It's just, yeah, I'm just not a fan of the essays, because as someone who did them, I struggled, and I would hate to relive the struggle. So really, good luck to you guys. But the most important part of any essay, in my opinion, is the introduction, because it's the same with English. The marker knows about what mark you're gonna get after you read the introduction, and the first sentence is a dead giveaway as well. So, out of these three theses, there's one that's much better than the rest. If the question was assess the significance of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk to Bolshevik consolidation of power, we have one that is just one sentence that doesn't really give us much of a judgment. We have the second one, which gives us a judgment. It was highly significant. And then it adds on alongside additional contributing factors, which secured the hold on the Soviet Union. And then you have the last one, which is very wordy, very bulky, doesn't really answer the question about the significance of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk as like a big judgment. Yeah, so the second one is probably the best thesis statement. For theses, you want to keep it simple, mostly for the sake of your markers, because they want to answer they want you to answer the question, and you can answer the question in a very succinct way. You don't have to be complicated to be sophisticated. To be sophisticated, you just need to have a good argument that you're giving out to the world. So what your thesis should do is answer the question in its purest form. Give your judgment and give your judgment and give your essay, make a thesis, but don't put so much historical detail in your thesis that will take away from the rest of the detail you need to put in later in your essay. Because how I like to think of it is I don't want to waste all my good information on my introduction when I can use it in my body paragraphs to make a much more detailed point. My introduction is an introduction. It's to introduce. It's not to explain my exact point. It's to give a little taster, get the marker excited to read about the rest of my essay. It needs to be strong and assertive. It needs to be nuanced, but you don't want to have the thesis as a nuanced one, because you don't want to confuse your marker. So thesis writing is an introduction writing in general is not a show of your vocabulary. It's not a show of how many dates you know as a part of the historical information that you know. It's a show of how well you can answer the question that's been given to you and how well you can properly form a judgment and a proper argument and how you're going to lay it out. That's what the marks want to see. They want to see, can you lay out an essay in a logical way where it builds upon each other to make this cohesive picture that answers the question. That's what they want, an answer to the question. So for an intro, you have your thesis, which is your overall judgment, then a brief outline of your context, your like why you think what you're thinking, and like yeah, you keep it brief. Then you outline your essay, what each paragraph is going to be about. Usually I make this like 2 sentences, not 1 sentence, just because I like to make sure that they know what essay I'm writing, so I signpost it quite clearly. And then you want to have your thesis restated. I literally just write my thesis backwards. I put the second half in front of the first half, and bam, it's a new thesis. It's my thesis restated. That's it. Clear language is key. You want to say things like it was significant, it was highly or limited. But when you're doing to what extent questions, I think that it's something that has been taught really weirdly at some schools, but when you do to what extent questions, you shouldn't be just saying to a significant extent and then leaving it there. You want to make a judgment on the extent. So to the extent that, let's say, the significance of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, it was significant, it was key to this to a significant, to the, it was, oh, that was a bit wordy, it was significant to the extent that it changed, changed Russia, but that change was also a product of this. You want to make sure that you're not just giving like significant extent as your answer. Like that's not answering to the extent, it's to what extent. You're not answering the what part. Anyway, that might not have made sense. You might go through in more detail later. Maybe I'll talk about it in the next lecture if I'm asked to come back for modern history. But yeah, you just want to make sure that to what extent you're making a proper judgment. So this is an example. You've got your thesis, your explanation, your outline, and then your restated one. This one says it was only partially successful. So the partially part is the judgment. And it's important that it's repeated at the end to make it very clear what they think. Okay, and then paragraph structure, you have your judgment, explanation, further examples, and then link to judgment. It's important that when you explain with examples, you're using detail. That means historian quotes. It also means being specific about the events and issues in terms of the dates it happened, who was involved, what it meant, all that stuff. Okay, so historian quotes, it's a very big question when it comes to essays. Do I need them or not? Yeah, it's a great addition to your response, and as someone who got a band 6 in modern history, I can tell you I had lots of historian quotes. Now, there's a difference between overloading historian quotes and actually integrating them into a good essay. So a lot of students, they rely too heavily on the historians and end up just like dumping a bunch of quotes in, and that's not what we want. We don't want to just dump everything, and what we want to do is we want to use those different interpretations to show how our judgment is backed up, or is like how our judgment is a little bit contested in history. You don't have to use historian quotes to have detail. You can use dates, names, facts, statistics. You don't need quotes from people because quotes are quite hard to come across. Like good quotes are hard to come across, and they're hard to remember because you need to remember who said them as well. And you might lose time in an exam if you're trying to remember the exact quote. So yeah, not like having no quotes doesn't mean you can't get a good mark. It just, in my opinion, it really adds to the essay. And I would much rather read an essay that isn't just about one person's opinion. I'd rather see that they were able to read outside of the stuff they were given in class to see what other people thought on the thing. I like not that I'm a marker or anything, but I just found that markers liked it better when I had historian quotes in, because it showed to them that I cared enough about the entire topic to actually like think about what other people thought, if that makes sense. And then a conclusion is just the introduction. But again, so to wrap up, just some quick how to survive the modern HSC. Firstly, I'd say stay on top of content. Modern is the like is the hardest. It has so much content in it, so make sure that you're staying on top of your work and that you are writing good notes throughout the year. Don't just leave it until 2 weeks before the HSC when you're on StuVac or whatever. Don't do that. Actually stay on top of content. Also, it's kind of a pattern now, like it's not really a pattern, but for the last 2 years, my HSC and this year's HSC, the modern one has come like right after English. So you don't really have time to procrastinate and like write notes during the HSC. You have to write it during the year, or else you're not going to be able to get it done. And with that being said, don't leave your study until the night before the exam. Don't do that. That's just a terrible idea. And yeah, do some practice essays throughout the year so you can build your skills, not just try to immediately get good at source analysis the day before an exam. And also take time now to consider how you're going to study. So you've already done one term of the modern HSC, which is great. Good job. How did you study for it? Think about how you study, how you want to study for the different topics. For me, I found writing notes for the short answer sections and then writing essay scaffolds for the essay sections worked best for me. I also used flashcards to help me like memorize them later on, but it all started off by writing those notes and scaffolds. So it depends on what you want to do. And then now some final like non-modern related unsolicited HSC advice, but yeah, HSC is a scary year. So my general tips are firstly to like not burn out. Try your best not to get burnt out. Burnout is so real. Don't let it ruin your last year of high school. Take time to relax. Do stuff you enjoy. Don't drop all your extracurriculars. You will regret it, because then you're gonna have nothing to do but study, and then you get sad that you're procrastinating studying when you could be doing something fun that you really enjoy, your extracurriculars. Plan something cool to do after you finish the HSC. Find your way to de-stress. And if uni is stressing you out, getting into uni is stressing you out, know that there are so many pathways to get in. There's no one track to get into where you want to go. There's always another way and a back door. Yeah, so don't worry too much about that. And yeah, don't like no one cares about your ATAR once you're in uni, so don't worry about that. And work together, support each other, share notes. Like people make a big deal about internal rankings, but once it comes to the actual HSC, like you want everyone to do well, so help each other and do active recall. Flashcards are your best friend. If you learn from flashcards. If you don't, that's fine. But yeah, active recall is really good. Go to sleep, get sleep, fix your sleep schedule, because like more sleep is really good for improving your exam performance. It's a known fact, so people should stop ignoring that known fact. They should stop ignoring sleep science and actually sleep. And also, if something doesn't go your way, learn from your mistakes and move on. It says move one, but it should be move on. There's nothing else to there's nothing else you can do to change your current results that you just got. So change your next ones. Put in effort to figure out what your weaknesses are, improve those, keep your strengths up, and you'll be good. So yeah, and of course, get a good start, be consistent. If you have a lazy day, don't be upset, because I procrastinate. Everyone procrastinates. It's easy to beat yourself up, but like everything is in a balance, so don't worry. It's better than burning out, because burning out means that you'll be very unproductive for a very long time because you're so tired and you don't want to do that. The syllabus is your friend. Use it as a checklist. And just know it's just one excruciatingly tedious year. Only one. And you do your best, you get it done, you get out, and it feels lots. Like, it feels like the most important thing you're ever going to do, because so far it's probably the biggest, longest exam you're ever going to have to do, and it feels really big. But once you're out, you're done. You can say goodbye to modern history forever, and or unless you want to study it in more detail, then you go for it. But the HSC, it's 1 year, never worth compromising your health. You come first, not the HSC. And I will say, this is probably like not the best advertisement for uni, but if you think you're stressed in the HSC, like, you're learning the same amount of content in half the time when it comes to uni. So like, the HSC is, it's gonna be not the most of your worries in life. So don't worry about it. But that brings us to the end of the lecture. So thanks for coming. Hopefully you learned something about Nazi Germany. And if not, I'm really sorry. Hopefully you learned something in school then. And you won't have to rely on this poor lecture. But yeah. Cool. I will see you guys maybe next lecture. I don't know. But thanks for listening in, and good luck with the HSC and modern history. And yeah, that's all. That's really all I have to say. So yeah, thank you for coming.